Hello and welcome back to War of the Yokai. This is Book 5, Part 6, which I think makes this the longest set of these so far, at least in terms of episode length or part length, whatever you want to call it. This is my fourth take of this, and I swear to God, I'm about to scream. The first take, I didn't have the book up. The second take, I didn't realize till I'd already started that my mic was all the way over to the right instead of in front of me like it normally is. The third take was going smoothly until I had to pause it to plug my headphones in. And then instead of restarting the recording, like a smart person, I accidentally stopped it. So, fourth time's the charm? Fourth time's the charm. Please? Let's hope this is the fourth time. Okay, let's get started, shall we? It took only an hour for everyone to meet at the entrance to the catacombs, and fortunately, Emiko and Midori had been in the area, which had allowed them to scope it out a bit. Emiko hadn't seen anyone suspicious enter or leave, but had heard some faint chanting sounds coming from somewhere deep inside. Too faint to make out any specific words or voices, but loud enough to hear the ritualistic ebb and flow of vocal tones. Midori, meanwhile, had attempted to cast a spell of Detect Life to maybe get a count of what they were up against, but it seemed they were too far out of range. Nonami was still on the phone to the French president when the group converged on their location. "Yes, I understand, Monsieur President," she said into the speaker, "but it's been fixed now, I promise you. Just tell people, I don't know, tell them it was a movie shoot gone slightly awry or something. I have to go now. Adieu." She put her phone away and approached Emiko. "Any luck?" Emiko shook her head in a negative, explaining what she at least had heard while Usuko approached Midori. The Lich's yokai crystal was able to give her back her full human appearance, but it wasn't able to disguise the green irises of her eyes, which flickered like fire when you looked closely at them. Usuko introduced herself, smiling heartily. "Nice to finally meet you, Midori-san," she said. "Emmy told me a lot about you. I'm glad we're finally able to meet face to face. You know some magic too, yeah? Maybe we can teach each other some spells." Yes, that would be nice," smiled Midori faintly. "It's nice to finally put a face to a name. Emiko has told me a lot about you." The last to arrive was Iris, and upon seeing Elizabeth with the group, she couldn't help but scowl. That traitorous bitch was here? Why? Did she know who Iris was? It couldn't just be a coincidence, could it? No, it was. It had to be. After all, there was absolutely no way she could know that Iris was a spawn of Aramana's. Still, Iris was smart enough not to broach such a topic, openly or otherwise, and as well quickly changed her expression to a much more neutral one. Emiko was already aware she wasn't who she said she was, and this whole situation had gone completely south when they'd come to what was supposed to be her hometown. Of all the places in the world that psychic vampire could have fled to, it had to be where the dragon had told them she'd lived for decades. Fortunately, she'd been able to somewhat clear up the situation by explaining she'd only ever stayed near or around the cathedral, but it was clear that Sarah at least was starting to doubt her openly. And if the Banshee was this open about her doubtfulness, Iris was sure the others weren't too far behind. If she could just convince Usuko of her innocence, then maybe she could use her good nature to get everyone's suspicions off her back. Well, not exactly gullible, she knew the Pinkette had a big heart, something someone like Iris had no compunctions with exploiting if need be. "Everyone here, then?" inquired Nonami rhetorically. "Good. Now listen well. These catacombs are massive. They stretch on for miles and miles, and they aren't fully mapped. In order to stay together in the pitch black, we're going to be connected via the bonds of fate. If anyone here is allergic to holy relics, say so now." Holy relics? Iris gulped. She wasn't completely sure if she shared her father's weakness to such things, but as a direct spawn of his essence, it seemed likely. She couldn't let the golden rope now in Nonami's hands touch her, even if just through clothes, as the holy energies would burn her to the core. Assuming again that she shared Aramana's weakness. "What's the matter, Iris?" asked Emiko in a knowing, mocking tone. "You seem a bit pale. Don't tell me you're affected by holy relics now." Of course I am," she laughed, remembering a less important reason why she'd chosen Gargoyle as her cover alias to begin with. "Gargoyles are a type of demon. Holy relics like that are our bane. Here, I have an idea, though." She quickly ripped the lower half of her shirt off and tied it into a knot, which she gave to Nonami to affix to the bonds. This way, I'm still connected, but I'm not directly touching it. With that matter settled, the group began their journey down deep below the surface of Paris, into the realm of the dead. Lining the walls were skulls, ribs, and bones of all kinds. One-time inhabitants of Paris, in death their bodies became part of the city itself. Very quickly did their impromptu tour veer off the public paths and down an impossibly dark tunnel. Usuko, unable to see properly, summoned a magical orb of light, and in doing so nearly soiled herself at the sight before her. It looked like a man halfway phased through the wall, his face mere inches from her own. In sheer panic, Usuko called on her bat and swung it down at him, shattering his head and upper torso into hundreds of stone shards. "Congratulations," sighed Nonami sarcastically. "You just destroyed a harmless statue. Come on, let's keep moving." Usuko was thoroughly embarrassed as the train moved on, though just as she made sure everyone was out of sight, she sent a quick flash of chronomagic at the statue to repair it before rejoining them. The remainder of the trip was long and boring, with little to see aside from the occasional large rat or random bit of scrawled graffiti. Occasionally, Usuko would hear an odd sound from down a side passage, but would ignore it. The place was definitely haunted, as Sarah had explained, and not exactly by the most friendly of spirits. Many of the souls down here were relatively recent additions, urban explorers who got lost, or just people who had wandered too far without a map. Now they were trapped here until they could one day find their way to the surface. Hyoka and Midori had both thanked their lucky stars they hadn't died like that. The two had actually started talking about their own experiences with death during the walk, as morbid a topic as it was. Hyoka had mentioned how it had been so cold when she died, like she was turning into ice. In contrast, Midori brought up the burning fury she'd felt when her head rolled from her shoulders. Unconsciously, Nonami scratched at the almost invisible scar on her own neck, where she had once lost her own head briefly. "Perhaps we should keep our voices down," she whispered to the group. "Sound carries down here, and we're getting close to the shrine. Here's the plan when we get there, okay? Sarah, Hyoka, you two phase in first. Grab anything that looks like a power source or a key. Ray, Emiko, you rush in after them. Bash cultists, unless Abigail is in the room. If that's the case, Usuko, I want you to try and take her out with a surprise magic blast." "Better idea," interrupted Misato. "If she's in there, I'll snipe her. I brought my rifle just in case." Nonami seemed very unsure of this, but Usuko and Emiko were both able to vouch for Misato's marksmanship skills. Even Midori, who had been on the receiving end of her shots once, attested as much, and so Nonami complied. "Very well, but I want Usuko to provide you protection. Elizabeth, you and your friends should hang back until, or unless, the situation calls for your aid. We'll give you the key when this is all over. You have my word on that." The Dhampir nodded. Everything was set now, as the group rounded the corner leading to the large antechamber. It was a large rectangular room with 6 pillars arranged in a circle, supporting the ceiling in the middle. At the center of the circle stood a completely nude Abigail, performing some manner of ritual before an oddly shaped statue. The statue was roughly 4 feet high and carved from what seemed to be black marble. It depicted an unknown entity insectoid in appearance with two long spiny forelegs, two dagger-like rear legs, and a pair of spindly arms ending in scythe-like appendages. From those arms sprouted large, likely transparent wings that doubled the thing's wingspan. The face was a twisted and defiled thing, like the mockery of a man. Two large oblong patches where eyes should be, a mouth full of needle-like teeth, massive ears like a bat's, as well as the flat upturned nose. It looked vaguely familiar to Nonami, like something from a half-remembered dream. She shook off the feeling, knowing there would be time for considerations later. Without needing to say a word, Misato fired a shot from her rifle, dead center into Abigail's head. If they expected it to be the end of her, Abigail apparently had other ideas. The witch turned her head to greet the newcomers. A leering sneer stretched across her features. "You lot are persistent, I'll give you that. Unfortunately, I'm long gone from here now. I have a date with the Veil, you see. Oh, but do enjoy the company of my friends, won't you? They've been dying to meet you." Before the group had a chance to process her words, the image of Abigail faded away, and an eerie creaking sound began emanating from the walls. Dozens of skeletons, reanimated through esoteric means, began shambling towards them. At first, Ray thought it would be easy. After all, they were just bones. It was when she knocked two together, and they melded into one larger skeleton, that they realized what they were actually dealing with here. "Bone Lord!" shouted Elizabeth. A Bone Lord, a type of living dead, created from abandoned bones melded together into one singular consciousness. One Bone Lord could have, and in fact did have, enough bones in its mass to create the army now marching in on Usuko and the others. "I keep knocking them down," shouted Ray as she swung her kanabo through a group of skeletons, "but they keep reforming before I can finish them off." Ray had been calling to Nonami, but the vampire was currently stood in a petrified daze. The living dead were one of the only things she genuinely feared on an irrational level. An outsider may consider it ironic, given Nonami's own status as undead, that she would fear a similar class of being. But in truth, there was a great difference between undead and living dead. Undead were beings that, while not dead, were not technically alive either. As a vampire, Nonami would lack things like a pulse or the necessity to breathe, though she could certainly fake both if necessary. The living dead, meanwhile, were entities that had died and were then brought back by outside means. Reanimated corpses like skeletons, stitched together abominations like Prometheans, necromantically revived corpses. Oh, I'm turning into one apparently. Like zombies. All of these were counted amongst the ranks of the living dead. Beings like Midori may have blurred the line between the two, but this Bone Lord was undeniably in the latter camp. The vampire racked her brain, trying to remember the weakness these beings had, but her panicked state made such attempts difficult. She knew it had something to do with one of the bones. Usuko was managing well. Fortunately for her, the holy energies of her angel form were able to burn away some of the corrupted bones, though even then the things were able to reform again and again. There seemed to be no end to the flow of bones rolling into the chamber, but that gave her an idea. If they could draw it out of the catacombs, away from this endless supply of fresh calcium, they might be able to beat the Bone Lord down. Also, Bone Lord. Boner. "What are we under?" asked Usuko, blocking a rather powerful swipe from one of the skeletons. "Can we burrow up from here?" The question from her niece was able to shake Nonami from her petrified state, if briefly. Gare du Nord, she called back. Train station, a pretty busy one. Why? Well, it's better than a public park, sighed Usako, hoping the train yard itself was above them rather than the station. Nonami, dig us a tunnel, straight up. We're fighting the sack of bones on our terms. Come on. Nonami nodded, focusing her stone powers on the chamber walls, finding a spot she could start excavating without bringing the whole place down on them. While she did so, it was Elizabeth of all people who stood at her back and fended off the skeletal horde with her obsidian size. At last, she found a spot on the north wall and began wheeling stone and dirt out of the way, creating a perfectly circular tunnel leading straight to the surface. She briefly peeked her head out to investigate where it led, only to be filled with dread to find it led smack into the middle of the station, where dozens of people had begun to gather around the brand new hole on the floor. "Get clear! Run!" shouted Nonami, thinking of an excuse as fast as she could. "There was a gas leak! This place is about to explode!" And by the way, she said this in French. It's just not a case of I had to translate it. Fortunately for the vampire, it seemed no one around wanted to stay and test the merits of her claims, and the civilians began to flee the crowded station. The timing was fortuitous, for just as the last people left, the skeleton army began forcing the girls back towards the tunnel. "Come on, up to the surface!" shouted Usako. "Lead them into the station. We'll have better odds there." Excuse me. Forming a wedge, the girls began backing up slowly, allowing the horde to push them back. Before vacating the chamber, however, Elizabeth had spotted the key she'd been after resting on a pedestal in front of the bizarre statue. She directed Russ to grab it and run, which the shade did, though not before taking a rough swipe to the arm from a straggling skeleton. Once everyone was on the surface, Nonami sealed the tunnel shut, leaving roughly 4 skeletons to deal with. As Nonami began to speak a plan, the skeletons shuddered in unison, falling to pieces. For a moment, even Sarah thought they had won. Then the bones began coalescing, merging into a massive skeletal entity 10 feet tall, with a spinal column cord and a clavicle shield. An absolute monstrosity of necromantic proportions, it swung the ivory blade, Iris and Ray just barely dodging out of the way as the sword cut through a nearby kiosk like it was butter. "Great thinking, Usako," yelled Sarah sarcastically. "Bring it out into the open where it can become an even bigger nightmare." "I didn't know," she shouted. "But look on the bright side. It's all in one place now. We can focus all our power on it." Emiko seemed to agree with Usako, as she called on her magical girl form and brought out her hammer. Lunging like an azure jaguar, she brought her hammer down on the Bone Lord's shin plate. Instead of cracking, though, the force of the impact sent a shockwave through Emiko's body that sent her reeling. Somehow, the bones had fused together in such a way that made them so much tougher than the sum of its parts. Ray proceeded to unleash a torrent of flames at it, as Iris opened her jaws wide and let loose a similar jet of fire from her maw. Neither seemed to have any effect, though, but it did provide Usako and Midori a great window of opportunity while it was distracted by them. Midori had been staring at it for a while now, like one might a really cool bug, but not registering any fear, at least not visibly. "I know what to do," she declared to Usako. "I just need to get close to it. Can you help me, Takibana-san?" "You can count on me, Midori-san," smiled the pinkette, switching to her seraphim form to allow for better flying. "Grab onto me and just tell me where you want dropped." "There!" exclaimed Midori, who dropped off Usako and landed in the entity's ribcage. Without hesitation I think I skipped a part there. I skipped writing a part there. Oops. Well. Anyway, without hesitation or fear, she approached it, violet light matching the glow in the giant's eyes emanating from her palms. The Bone Lord seemed almost calmed by her presence, perhaps sensing a kindred spirit in the teenage lich. Midori placed her glowing hands on the Bone Lord, purple-blue tendrils of energy reaching up into every corner of its being, and then... "Found you," she said triumphantly, ripping a small pelvis from the mass of bones. The effect was instant, and as the entire mass of bones collapsed into a lifeless pile once more. Midori held the glowing pelvis, staring at it longingly for a moment before stashing it into her bag. "It's not such a bad thing," she explained. "It's lonely. Abigail told it if it killed us, it wouldn't be lonely again. I'll take care of it from now on, if that's okay." Nonami seemed a bit worried at the idea, but trusted Midori. With the matter now settled and the bones absorbed into the ground by Nonami's power, there was now time to discuss what Abigail had mentioned before. "The veil," sighed Sarah solemnly. "They're really targeting the veil, huh?" "What's the veil?" asked Usuko in her usual inquisitive manner. She thought she could recall hearing the term somewhere before, but couldn't quite place where. "The veil is... it's both a concept and a place, I suppose. You've probably heard it mentioned, a barrier between this world and the spirit world. There is one place on Earth where this barrier is purely physical, and it's back home in Ireland." Sarah continued to ponder for a moment before her eyes widened in alarm. "She's gonna try and destroy it. What else would someone like that want to do there, on Samhain of all days?" Now it was Nonami's turn to ask questions. "How do you know what will be then, Sarah?" "Remember that deadbeat we fought earlier? He mentioned a final task on the Day of Hallows. Likely Halloween." The Banshee turned to Usuko. "Before you ask, Halloween is the modern name for Samhain, Usuko." "I knew that," protested Usuko. "Halloween's one of my favorite holidays after Christmas. But why would she want to destroy this veil? And why specifically on Halloween?" "Simple," came the voice of Iris from behind Usuko, the setting sun casting an ominous shadow across the pink hat. "These guys want chaos. The best way to do that is to destabilize the barrier between the worlds. The destruction would do more than just release a few spirits, though. It would destabilize the entire fabric of reality. Real end of days type shit. Dogs and cats living together. Mass hysteria." She paused. As for the why now? From roughly the autumn equinox until Devil's Night, the veil between the worlds grows weaker by day. No one's ever been quite sure why. On Samhain, Halloween, the barrier goes down completely for just a few moments, allowing spirits of all sorts to enter the world. Even though the portal itself is in a cave in the Irish countryside, the effect stretches across the whole planet whenever the local clocks strike 9 p.m. Just after trick-or-treaters are safely inside, and the shadows crawl ominously, just after trick-or-treaters are safely inside, and the shadows crawl across the streets, with the only illumination coming from the errant jack-o'-lantern. For some reason, the phrase jack-o'-lantern made Sarah perk up, a look of realization on her face. "Jackie!" she exclaimed. "She'll be able to help for sure. I'll give her a call right away. Let her know we're coming." Sarah rushed off to make the call as the group assembled to begin planning their next move. When they'd left Fumizaki several days ago, no one had expected they'd have the fate of the world suddenly thrust into their hands, but here it was. If Sarah and Iris were right, then Abigail, and by extension Magali Anarchia's goal was now apparent. Chaos and anarchy without a care as to the method of how, culminating in the breakdown of reality itself. Why? Who could say? Perhaps, as Abigail was known to feed on fear, paranoia, and more, it was simply to fill the world with such feelings in high quantity. Perhaps there was no reason beyond the desire to simply watch the world burn. Whatever the case, Usuko was determined not to let that happen. She wasn't going to let some old witch ruin the world she loved so much. Anyone that threatened peace needed to be put down. Whoa, where'd that come from? She thought to herself. I mean, yeah, she needs to get taken care of, but... She shook her head rapidly, breaking herself out of the stupor. Sarah was returning, apparently with good news. Sorry that I keep clearing my throat. I feel like a frog in there. "Jacqueline is going to send out search parties across the whole country. she said, a bit of hope back in her voice. "She's the queen of the spirit realm, if you didn't know. Jacqueline O'Lantern. We go way back, her and I. Now that they know the Vale is in danger, Abigail's going to find herself having a much harder time than she might have otherwise." "Still, we shouldn't underestimate her," replied Nonami. "Clearly, she is incredibly powerful, and if I'm being honest, I don't know how we can defeat her." On that cheery note, they began making their way to Garden of France, keeping their eyes peeled for Migueli Anarchia members the whole while, but finding none. Upon entering her temporary quarters, all Usako wanted to do was fall into bed and go to sleep. In fact, after a small meal and a very warm shower, she did just that, drifting off seconds after her head hit the pillow.
"Usako, hear me."
Usako was in the dream place again. Strange, it had been a while since she'd been here. Her dreams of late had been disturbing, with either the liminal spaces she'd been in just before coming to France or other things she cared not to think about. Now she was here again, and surprise, surprise, Aramanas was here as well. Once again, though, he seemed almost concerned for the pinkette, which she picked up on immediately. "Let me guess, you know what's going on?" His massive, smoky black head nodded once in acknowledgement. "Do you know how we can beat her?" He chuckled darkly.
Perhaps, perhaps, but there's a price. Information for information. You understand, I'm sure."
Changing his voice. Usako rolled her eyes. At least he wasn't asking for her body in exchange. "What do you want to know?"
"The girl, the one called Megami. Who is she really? I sense my own power within her, to a degree, but not enough to make her useful to me. How is this so?"
Usako sighed before telling much as she safely could to the massive black shape. That she was her own daughter from the future, that she'd come back initially to kill her, and why. The deeds of future Usako seemed to impress Aramanas, not that Usako was too surprised.
"I didn't think you had it in you, child,"
he laughed.
"Perhaps there are surprises in store for me yet."
"Now, how do we beat her?" demanded Usako, glaring daggers at Aramanas.
"The only way you'll have a chance at stopping her is to do what those wretched heroes did to me 5,000 years ago. You must combine your elemental powers, not their effects, but their purest form of raw elemental energy. The fact there are 6 of you and not 4 may prove to be a boon in this instance. Pour your energies together. Cross the streams, I believe the modern term is, and she'll be undone."
He turned away, as if he were done, and began walking away, but turned his head back briefly.
"Oh, and don't bother trying this trick on me when we eventually meet face to face. I've had 5 millennia to devise ways of countering that attack. It won't work on me a second time. Farewell, Usako, and for both our sakes, do not fail this."
Ow, my neck! This is like the only voice, like aside from the kittens, that actually hurts my neck muscles. As Aramanas vanished, Tatsuya appeared on the horizon opposite, and Usako felt a wave of relief wash over her. She hadn't seen her mother in so long. "Mom!" she cheered, rushing over to hug the taller pinkette. "Hey, little rain cloud." "Hey, little rain cloud," she giggled, petting Usako's head. "It's been a while. Longer, I think, for you than for me. Chronomancy?" Usako looked down at her feet, feeling extremely guilty all of a sudden. Yeah, she mumbled. But not what you think. It's so I can fix Kuriko. I have to. Tetsuya frowned in only the way a mother could, putting a comforting arm around her daughter. Usako, what you did in New Atlantis was remarkable. I know, I was there for the whole thing. You actually achieving Seraphim at so young an age was incredibly shocking. And not only that, but then using the revival technique on your first try. She shook her head in amazement. Either you're a prodigy or extremely lucky. And the point is, Kuriko will wake up eventually. I promise you this. You shouldn't dabble in these sorts of magics just to get her back sooner. I can understand the intention, and believe me, I want to see Kuriko again too, but this isn't the way, kiddo. Usako truly felt embarrassed and ashamed from her mother's light scolding. Of course, she knew Kuriko would probably eventually wake up, but she wanted her back soon. She didn't want her baby sister to miss out on her life just because Usako had messed up and let her tag along anyway. Is that really it? Asked Tetsuya carefully when Usako brought this up in reply. Or is it that you just want your sister back on your terms? I know you love your sister, Usako, but you need to be more careful. Dabbling with forces of the universe like this, even in seemingly innocuous ways, can have disastrous effects on the world around you. Look what happened when your own daughter was flung back in time. Her arrival sent shockwaves through the time stream, the likes of which we'll never completely know. You've even taken off years of your own life to practice this magic. How old are you now? Really? 17? 18? Probably about that, whispered Usako meekly. Tatsuya sighed, scolding herself mentally for being so hard on her child. Usako, I'm sorry. I forget you're still very young, even by human standards, let alone angel standards. I suppose when you get to be around 20,000 years old or so, you tend to forget what it's like, huh? Usako's eyes bugged out. How old? Yes, well, probably older, admitted Tatsuya. But that's about how far back my first cognizant memory is. Before then, it's hazy. But yes, I'm one of the original angels. People in this time may have known me as Tetsuya Takibana, but I'm perhaps better known as Ramiel, the Thunder of God. The first thing out of Usako's mouth was, Can you scream geometrically? Tetsuya just stared at her daughter in disappointed confusion. What? Never mind. A moment passed before Usako thought it prudent to bring up the stuff Masato had told her about. Oh, here's a typo. A moment passed before Usako thought it prudent to bring up the stuff Masato had told her about to future. Had told to her about the future. Yes, I won't lie, Usako. I was very shocked when I heard that. As an angel, I'm very good at knowing when someone's telling the truth, and I have no reason to doubt her, as painful as that might be to say. Please tell me you're not, that you wouldn't ever consider such a thing. Usako looked down at her feet and sighed. She wanted very much to say no in that moment, to reassure both herself and her mother that of course she would never do such horrible things, but she had. Or at least a version of herself had. A version so seemingly similar to herself, with only one act being the dividing line between the two of them. I want to say I wouldn't, sighed Usako, but I don't know what to believe anymore. As I am right now, no, never in a billion years. I'd sooner die than ever commit those kinds of atrocities. Tetsuya smiled, putting her arms around Usako. hugging the girl as only a mother could. That's what I wanted to hear, Usako. There's one last thing you need to know before I leave. The Lance of Longinus, your bat, you may be able to... Her words were cut off as a black and crimson filter fell over the world, like bleeding obsidian crystals. Usako remembered seeing this before, while she was comatose after the fight at Hyoka's wedding. Who are you? She demanded of whatever being was responsible. Show yourself, coward! Coward, chided a voice from behind the pinkette. She swiveled on her heel, only to be met face to face with herself. No, not herself. Not quite. This person was older, mid-30s perhaps, early 40s. Her pink hair was kept short, trimmed neat and regal, and interspersed with thin streaks of silver and white. If there was any doubt to her identity in Usako's mind, the rune-encrusted gold bat in her left hand dispelled it in seconds. I've been called many things, by many people, but coward, never that. You, growled Usako. You're not real. You're a hallucination. Our Amana's pulling a trick. The alternate Usako, Altsuko, laughed. What a fool you are, that you cannot comprehend the truth when it's staring you in the face. She grabbed Usako by the chin and pulled her close, appraising the girl as though she were a gem in the hands of a jeweler. Or perhaps you do understand. You simply choose to pretend reality isn't what's staring you in the face. She tossed Usako to the ground, the younger pinkette landing in a heap at Altsuko's feet. You will achieve your destiny, Usako Takibana. I will make sure of it, even if it means giving you the push you need myself. Little Kuriko is so defenseless anymore. It would be a shame if something happened. A flare of golden light erupted from Usako then. Erupted not from Usako then, but from beyond the black and red veil in the dream world. Tatsuya, at least Usako assumed it was her, ripped through the barrier and landed an earth-shattering blow into Altsuko's stomach. The force of the punch set the doppelganger rocketing hard into the side of her barrier, from where she slid down slowly and landed in a heap. Still very much alive, but unable to move momentarily. No longer moving at inhuman speeds, Usako got as good a look at her mother as she could. She seemed to be in a state similar to Seraphim, but her form was hazy and indistinct, and Usako found herself unable to focus on any one part of her at a time. Fleetingly, she realized this might be her mother's true form she was witnessing. You... Mother? Groaned Altsuko. No, this isn't real. You can't be here. In a flash, the crystalline structure vanished, and Altsuko along with it. And Tatsuya returned to normal. Before waking up, Usako could feel her mother's hands gently caressing her hair, a sensation that remained briefly once consciousness had returned. The pinkette knew she had to warn Masato as soon as she could, but didn't know what to say. Somehow she thought, hey, so my evil double followed you back in time and is after us? I know this because I fought her with my mom in a dream. Might not be the most convincing thing to say. Well, she'd have plenty of time to think about it on the plane to Ireland, at least. Abigail looked out from her hotel room window, down at the hustle and bustle about on the streets of Dublin, and smiled darkly. She'd just finished the most recent ritual to restore her powers, supplicating before the statue of yet another dark god, this one known as Karodis. She could feel her dark energies growing greater with each mortal sacrifice she gave to those demonic entities. Now, who was the next one on her list? Oh, Aramanes, She pondered aloud. Let's see how to invoke him. Pulling a few skulls, a vial of blood, and some fresh tendons from her bag, she placed them in the summoning circle she'd drawn on the floor of the room. Ahrimanes was said to be the most powerful of all the demon gods, so gaining his favor would be quite the boon indeed. Mighty Lord Ahrimanes, she began to chant in an ancient tongue, lighting the tendons aflame with a purple glowing candle. I beseech thee to come forth and hear my prayer, unholiest of unholies. The room began to fill with the scent of rotten eggs and sulfur, meaning a demonic presence was near. From the smoke emerged a massive, saurian, armored face with countless eyes within eyes. When it spoke, the room rumbled as though there were an earthquake.
Who dares to invoke me in this pitiful age?
He demanded, setting his eyes on Abigail and instantly recognizing her.
You. I know you.
Wait, I know you. Then you know my need for your power is great, O mighty one, she placated, bowing fully nude before him in submission. Please, just a small portion of your energies. A small trifling is all I need, and She was cut off as Ahrimanes laughed like he'd just heard the funniest joke of his life. Abigail could feel her face flushing with embarrassment and rage, but managed to keep her cool for the moment. He was the highest-ranking demon god, after all, and she was just a lowly witch, one with incredible otherworldly powers, but a witch even still. I know I am unworthy of your power, O Lord, but I ask only for a temporary boon. You may have whatever you wish in return, short of my own life. The lives of my followers, though, as many as you wish.
You don't understand your place or your purpose, do you, whelp?
He continued to laugh.
You are simply the means to an end for me, to make Takibana stronger for me. Your plans for the veil are directly antithetical to my own, so tell me why I would ever consider lending you my power for even a brief moment. No, and in fact...
It felt like something inside of Abigail had burst. An organ, perhaps. The pain was beyond excruciating, and she doubled over, letting out an agonized scream.
Enjoy dealing with that ruptured spleen, worm,
he growled.
I'm certain you can repair that. Oh, absolutely, I know you can. But it will take time. Time enough for Takibana to find you and to finish you.
Excuse me. As Abigail lay there on the floor, writhing in pain and clutching her abdomen, the smoky, vaporous form of Ahrimanes faded away and vanished. She was perhaps fortunate that someone in a neighboring room had heard her scream and alerted the front desk. She'd be sent to a human hospital, one where she could peacefully convalesce, but one where her movements would be severely limited. That damn demon! How had he known about her plans? And who was Takibana? Briefly, she recalled the pink-haired girl she'd seen at Gardna back in Japan, the one she'd spied on along with the Blue Oni. She'd recalled hearing that name then as well. Was that girl someone to be contended with then? As she lay there, abating the pain with magic, she consulted her tome for answers. A useful tool, it functioned like an encyclopedia of whatever its owner wanted to know of. If the information was stored somewhere in a book on Earth, the tome could access it. Of course, the rise in popularity of digital media over traditional had started to make her beloved tome obsolete, but still she used it. Ah, so this Takibana girl was part angel and part... Oh, I'm sorry. Ah, so this Takibana girl was part angel and part dweller. She was essentially a walking contradiction. Half angel and essentially half fallen angel. I don't know why I said essentially twice. Essentially isn't even written there. Why did I say that? She was essentially a walking contradiction, half angel and half fallen angel. What a terrifying concept, and one Abigail almost found herself hoping she'd never have to fight. Almost. October 28th. As soon as they landed in the Dublin airport, Sarah could feel the energies of her homeland seeping into her, fueling her. Well, that and the incredible influx of spirit energy flowing from the weakening veil that let both she and Hyoka exist in fully physical forms without the need of yokai crystals. It had been decades upon decades since she'd been home, and the Banshee wanted nothing more than to see what had changed since she'd last been there. Sadly, she wasn't likely to get the chance for a few days. At least as her and her comrades... sadly, she wasn't likely to get the chance. She wasn't likely to get the chance for a few days at least, as her and her comrades had much more pressing matters to attend to. After disembarking, the group quickly made their way towards the entrance of the airport, where they were greeted by a pair of black-suited individuals. One male and one female standing in front of a limousine of the same color. "Sarah O'Malley," said the first, stepping forward to greet her, "and company. Her Majesty has been expecting you. Please come forward." The woman opened the door, revealing a translucent, violet-skinned woman with equally purple hair. Orange-yellow irises burned like coals against the black sclera of her eyes, and her grin was quite cheerful and toothy as she spotted Sarah. When she spoke, it was with an Irish accent so thick, hardly anyone present but Sarah could understand it. Okay, I'm just going to preface this. I can really only do Sarah's accent well, so apologies for this subpar Irish accent. "Lady O'Malley! Oh, it's been far too long. How have you been, lass? We've missed you around these parts, we have." "Aye." "I've missed you as well, my lady," responded Sarah with a courteous bow. Nonami and Emiko stepped forward and performed similar gestures. "Queen Jacqueline, it is an honor to make your acquaintance," stated Emiko. "I am Princess Ayo Mea of the Blue Oni." "It's good to see you as well, Majesty," smiled Nonami, "though I wish our presence here were under better circumstances." Jacqueline looked to the group. Okay, I've noticed twice now where I've put two instead of the. Jacqueline looked the group over momentarily, her gaze focusing on Iris for what the dragon felt was an uncomfortably long time before she replied. "As do I, Queen Maria, as do I." She paused before motioning for them all to join her in the limo. It had begun raining, and regardless, some things were better said out of the public eye. Once they'd all taken their seats, and the limo pulled away, Jacqueline continued. "We've done as you asked, Lady O'Malley. The riders are currently scouring the land searching for this Abigail lass. So far, there hasn't been any much luck, nay, but we did uncover one of their sails. Hold that thought. What about the Fays?" She's like borderline Scottish. If you are Irish, I'm so sorry for Jacqueline's accent. I have not had much time to practice her. And for what it's worth, when we get to this part, I want an actual Irish voice actress for this. The limo seemed to shimmer for a moment before slowly disappearing from sight. At the same time, it slowly began to reappear in another place entirely. Uzuko looked down at her hands and saw that they turned transparent. In fact, so had everyone except Sarah, Jacqueline, Yoka, and the drivers. Outside the window, signs that had been perfectly readable a second ago were now... Wait, were they backwards? "Welcome to the spirit world, Uzuko," said Sarah, seeing the confusion on the pink cat's face. "Things are sort reversed here. You'll get used to it, and we shouldn't be here long. Right, Jacqueline?" "Aye, just a small little formality." Oh god, this is full on. God. Okay, you know what? I'm just gonna just so we can differentiate their accents. I'm gonna do kind of partial Scottish for her. I'm sorry. I know there's different accents, but God help me. "Aye, just a small little formality with my husband so that you can have free range to miss in the area where the veil is. He's already agreed, after all." Oh, that was horrid. I'm so sorry. Oh. The rest of the drive was rather uneventful, with Sarah catching up with her friend, as well as Nonami speaking to the Spirit Queen as well. When there was a free moment, Usako leaned over to ask a question. Excuse me, miss. No, sorry, your majesty? Just Jacqueline is fine for now. Once we're in the palace, though, try to keep it a bit more formal. What do you need? I was, wondering if there was a way to, I don't know, see my mom? She's sort of a spirit, but from the front seat came a knowing laugh, and both Usako and Emiko's eyes went wide when they saw none other than Tatsuya sitting between the drivers. Hey, kiddo, how's it been? The palace grounds were several miles outside of Dublin, to the north of the city. As the limo drew closer, a heavy fog began creeping in, getting thicker and thicker with each passing minute. Soon, the palace itself came into view, if barely through the soup-like fog. A massive stone brick structure that looked older than anything Usako had ever seen. Near the doors where the limo parked were some lit braziers, though even the bright orange glow of the flames did little to increase visibility. When they arrived, Usako practically burst through the limousine doors and rushed to embrace her mother. Her experiences on the dream plane were one thing, but actually getting to see her mother with her own eyes in the waking world, that was something else altogether. Mama! She cried, embracing Tatsuya, or trying anyway, as she passed through her. Oh, Usako, sighed Tatsuya with a small smile. I'm sorry, dear. Soon, soon. Yeah, laughed Usako, a little embarrassed. Emiko was next to approach the angel, her expression a bit more reverent, and slightly wary. Mrs. Takibana, is that really you? She asked, scanning the woman with her eyes. As opposed to her ears? She definitely looked like Usako's mom. Tatsuya nodded in reply. It is. Emiko, I want you to know I'm eternally grateful for your friendship with my daughter, and that the two of you have my blessing. She sighed. Oh, you remind me so much of myself, especially when I was that age. My chair. Usako blushed. She was extremely glad to hear that her mother is... Bleh. Emiko blushed. She was extremely glad to hear that Usako's mother was approving of their relationship. It made her feel even more like her decision was the right one. It was Nonami's turn to greet Tatsuya now, and the vampire bowed curtly to the angel. Mrs. Takibana, it's a pleasure. She smiled. You're an angel, yes? How is it that your spirit is able to manifest here? I was under the belief such a thing was impossible. Well, normally, yeah, laughed Tatsuya. Normally I'm pretty much relegated to the dream plane where I can visit Usako directly. But because the veil's especially weak this year, I'm able to manifest in this realm for a little while. Figured there was no better time than now. So all of those dreams really are real, said Usako, a bit of both fear and awe creeping into her voice. She'd always known her experiences and there had to be real, but a small part of the Pinkette still held doubt that it was only wishful thinking. Now, though, she had the confirmation she needed. Usako turned to speak to Nonami, but the vampire had seemingly run off to speak to some other man that Usako didn't recognize. Whoever he was, he looked kind of familiar. Almost looked like her father, but with one hell of a goatee. Who's that? Asked Usako of Tatsuya. He kind of looks like that guy. Her mother sighed. Usako, dear, you really shouldn't hold such a grudge against your father. I know you blame him for so much of what happened, but he did it for you. Someday I hope you'll come to see that. As for who that is, I do believe he is Lugosi von Orlok, Nanami's father. Her teal-green eyes widened in realization. Oh, which means he's also your great-grandfather. Perhaps you should go say hi. Once Nonami is done, of course. Usuko pondered for a moment before agreeing and making her way over, though keeping a respectful distance for the time being. Father, whispered Nonami, tears flowing down her face. How I've missed you. Lugosi reached down and tried to lay a soothing hand on his daughter's head, but it passed through her. I have missed you as well, Maria, he said. You've grown well, my child. I couldn't be more proud of the woman you have become. Perhaps you will introduce me to your allies, your friends? Ah, yes, of course, smiled Nonami as Usuko approached the pair. In fact, why don't I introduce you to Usuko Takibana, my good friend and great niece? Lugosi stared down at Usuko, his expression perhaps neutral, but on his rather intimidating visage, it came across rather menacing. Usuko, you are the granddaughter of Francine, yes? It is good to finally meet you face to face. I wish you all the best in your future endeavors. Able. I love that voice. That's another fun one to do. Oh, thank you, smiled Usuko weakly. Introductions continued for a few more minutes before the great doors to this castle slowly creaked open and a man in fine robes emerged. His spectral majesty, King Erroneous, will now see you. And I think we're gonna stop there because we're close to an hour and this next part's not gonna take 4 minutes. So we'll leave Erroneous for the next part. I think this will probably be about 8 parts in total because I think we'll get to a certain part in the next part. Yeah. And then that'll leave some time at the end for one more part. So yeah, we're looking at about 8 parts. More or less. I don't see there being I'd rather go late on a part 8 than do a part 9 that's like just half an hour. So, alright. Until next time, is there anything else I need to say? Well, I'm sorry for all the this one being a little more interrupty than normal. I think that's it. So y'all take care. I'll see you in the next one. And until then, take care and bayonara.